All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for those of us who've joined us here in person and for those of you who are streaming online. Grateful to have Stacy here with us today. We'll make some introductions here shortly and move into our discussions, but we're really looking forward to learning from Stacy and hearing more about how we can prepare our agencies for expansion. My name is Danny Lineri. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Give, and honored today to have Stacy DiStefano here, and wanted to read a brief intro and a bio for Stacy. Stacy is the founder and CEO of Consulting for Human Services, a national advisory firm comprising over 60 subject matter experts and strategic advisors specializing in IDD, mental health, and substance use disorder and digital solutions. Consulting for Human Services is recognized as the leading advisor in nonprofit mergers and acquisitions, offering comprehensive support from matchmaking and due diligence through to post-close integration. With 3 decades of experience in the human services field, Stacy has held key leadership positions, including Vice President of Innovation at Resources for Human Development, Chief Operating Officer at Open Minds, and Chief Operating Officer at Chimes International. A trained solution-focused therapist, Stacy is sought-after speaker and trusted advisor to boards and private equity firms navigating complex M&A transactions in the nonprofit sector. Stacy.
Gosh, you're going to need a snack after that.
Welcome.
That was long.
This actually reminds me of when I introduced you on stage at the Tech Summit in DC last year.
Yes, you did.
That's exactly, it was a mouthful, but
is.
Your reputation precedes you, so we're glad to have you and lucky to be with you.
Thank you. It just means I'm old and I've been here a long time.
Well, you're aging like wine. So this is great. We're excited to learn from Stacy on how to strategically design and position agencies for growth, learn to think like a leader preparing for expansion, what to prioritize, how to align your team, and which key areas to focus on to ensure your agency is truly built to scale. So we have a series of questions, and then we'll open up potentially for a question or two in the audience. But Stacy, just to kick us off, thinking about expansion, what are some of the most common pitfalls that you see, and how can agencies avoid those?
Yeah, great question. So I think the most common pitfall is not thinking about it at all. So organizations that have been around for many decades, who have a niche place in the community, who have a set of followers or donors and all of those things, who think, I'm fine the way I am. The size we are is the size that we can stay. And I need to enforce what I tell our clients all the time. What got you here today is not what's going to get you there tomorrow. We are in a very different climate, not just in a different presidential climate, but just broadly in the past few years, there have been more folks in the space on the private equity side, with merger and acquisitions of nonprofits becoming scaled providers, that you have to have a strategy. So whether that is through organic growth, through answering RFPs or meeting with funders to take on more folks to serve, or even if it is M&A, which I know we'll talk about later, you have to have some kind of growth strategy. So I think the biggest thing is just talk about it. Let it out of the box, get comfortable with it, get your board comfortable talking about it. The biggest pitfall is just not having a strategy. Absolutely.
I appreciate some of those insights. And you've called out a few things that came up in our conversation this morning, but I'd love for you to articulate a bit more on this, is aligning your leadership team once you have that in place. What are some of the things that agencies can think through in terms of aligning their leadership or structuring their agency to be well positioned?
Yeah, I think it's really just having the moment with your team and your board to sort of take your eyes up, off the road and look around and see what's happening in the external environment. So a very easy SWOT analysis. That's something you don't need a consultant to do. You can do on your own with your team. Take a look at your own strengths and weaknesses of your organization. What are the opportunities in the areas that you currently serve? What are the weaknesses? Who are your competitors? So take a real look outside of your organization at the landscape and an honest assessment of where you fit in. Because I often find folks that are maybe $25-30 million providers in a state, they think they're big providers. And the reality is nationally, that is a tiny, tiny provider. Nationally, a mid-sized provider is about 150 million. So anything under that is a small provider. So I think just having that perspective opens your eyes to a growth strategy.
I love that. Just thinking about time, I want to comb through, make sure that I ask a couple of these questions. Just thinking about, let's look at this. Now, we talk about technology and data in scaling an agency, but what systems or tools have you seen within an agency that are making the biggest impact, or what should they potentially look to have in place to make sure that data is there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, metrics-based management is really the way that folks should be operating at a high level right now. And I've been in this space for 30 years. So many of the early years was, a folder and a pencil, or a black pen. Remember that when compliance was all about having a black pen instead of a red pen? We've moved beyond that as an industry, fortunately. But that takes a system. I mean, our operations today, regardless of the size of your organization, cannot be sustainable without a good technology system. That's just table stakes these days. So understanding that there are going to be a series of folks and pockets of folks in your organization who need to be brought on to a tech strategy, but that should be woven throughout all facets of your organization, from clinical operations to data, IT, revenue cycle management, back office, intake, compliance, most certainly. All of those things require like a good tech-enabled system.
That's a lot to consider, and what we find is that small organizations, all the way up, quite frankly, even into larger orgs, are fairly disparate there, and there's a large need to streamline and to reduce some of the redundant systems that are point solutions. It's still Wild West in a lot of ways out there, especially as groups try to merge and transition. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is with expansion, whether that's through merger or organic growth, taking on separate operating systems, what are some of the things that agencies can think through to make sure that they can work well together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's part of the upfront diligence of having a growth strategy, even if it is just going to be organic growth or responding to RFPs or some other joint venture partnerships, is having that assessment of where you stand now and knowing your own, capacity. Is there something you have to invest in before you can grow? Right? So when you think about having a house and having a strong foundation, if you want to build an addition on that house, whether you're building it yourself or you're paying a builder, you need to know that the foundation you have can support that expansion. And it's the same thing when we think about a growth strategy. Does the infrastructure you have today give you room to grow? And if you're thinking about, if you're an IDD provider thinking about more IDD, more of the same, can you expand what you have in order to support that? But you should also be thinking about adjacency growth. So are there other services that support the services you already do, and what will you need from a technology standpoint to do that? So I think that goes back to that eyes wide open. You have to lift your head up. And as leaders, I know, because I was in that role, and I know how hard it is to get at the day-to-day, but to have that forward-thinking strategy conversation, even if you don't execute on it, just to know that you have it in place, you're going to be better positioned as an organization.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a little bit back toward leadership, how should an agency adjust or structure leadership to prepare for expansion or a merger? And what qualities would you say are most important for them to have in that process?
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one, because the reality is the team you have may not be the team you need when you think about organizational growth, right? There are some folks who just want things to stay the same, and that's not going to be the person that, will help shepherd in the next iteration of your organization. So you have to do some hard conversations and assessment of your leadership team, your one level down, the management team there, whoever's in your leadership structure. Are they growth ready? Are they change management ready? Have you done the work to get them to understand why, right? Knowing the why is so important. It's not growth for growth's sake. It's growth to achieve a stronger mission or to serve more folks in your organization or to remain sustainable, but sharing that thinking broadly throughout your organization. So it's not just a few smart people at the top that know the why. That can be critically important to make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction.
I love that you brought up the mission-based, because all of the accounting magic in the world cannot overcome people who are not aligned or they're backed by a mission.
That's right.
So that's really nice. Thinking through any additional questions before we open it up for some of your takeaways as we wrap up our short conversation today. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from anyone here in the room today?
Yes. Yeah. That was a great question. So the question was, how do you manage or how do you have a conversation with a board who is resistant to change when you have a leadership team who is change ready? And that is such a common situation that we find, especially in legacy boards where there are no term limits. And I'm always surprised to hear that there are still organizations where folks say, I've been on the board for 30 years. Well, that's not really good governance. Things change over 30 years. There has to be term limits and folks rolling on and off. So I think having a structure that supports fluidity within the organization is something to talk about as well. But for the folks that are already there, I always presume best intentions. So if they're going to serve on the board, they're there because they are very much committed to the mission. And so it's usually from a position of fear and not wanting to lose something. So reassuring your board that, what is the point of growth? What are we trying to achieve? That it's not the Pac-Man model. We just want to get bigger for bigger sake and eat everything in front of us. That we have an intentional growth strategy and you take them along on that journey with you. Like, what is the persona of the ideal partner for you? And identifying those traits before you have the conversation and before you actually engage in an M&A discussion, having that hypothetical conversation about what would our ideal partner look like and how does 1 + 1 make 3 in this scenario? Because if 1 + 1 just makes 2, then they're right. They should be resistant. You always want to have a value add above and beyond just adding two organizations together. So I think if you start with that, start with the why, help them see and understand what they're afraid of, and what does it look like for you to be comfortable. I mean, I think that goes back to my solution-focused therapy days. When someone says, I don't want us to lose X, and then I'd say, well, what would it look like for you to be comfortable gaining? So I think it's those kind of open-ended questions that honor the fear and honor their service, but help them understand that this is a different environment than 30 years ago. Bringing someone from the outside to talk to the board, because oftentimes the board hears from the CEO, and if you say the very same thing, but someone else is paid to come in and say it, somehow it's like your children, right? They don't listen to you, but they'll listen to your friend's mom. Yeah, very similar. That's a great point.
Yeah, we appreciate the question, and there are obviously additional questions between those who are viewing online and from here in the room, and just wanted to ask how could someone get in touch with you and Consulting for Human Services? What would you ask them to do to reach out?
I would ask you to follow me on LinkedIn.
Okay,
and
LinkedIn first.
Come in on LinkedIn, and then also you can always reach us at consultingfhs.com.
Great.
And we'd be happy to answer questions and help folks guide through that process. It's a tough one.
It is. Well, we thank you so much for your time and expertise. Maybe you can make a few comments to close us up here, but grateful for everyone here in the room and for those of you who are watching online. And Stacy, once again, thanks for your time.
You.
Looking forward to this afternoon as well.
Yes, me too. Thank you. Appreciate it.